So this is the outline of my talk. I will of course start with some introduction and explain what motivated my work. The motivation is not to put anybody out of job. I thought of this and you will see that I'm talking about machine learning, not the learning of people. Then I will talk about some diffusion geometry work which I had done together with some people who are already in this room. And then I will explain why it's not adequate for what I'm looking for. And then I will explain a one-shot method which I recently discovered. And this is
Hrishikesh, sorry for interruption. I think your slides do not show up.
In case
you want it. We do not see any slide on the screen.
Oops. Okay. Share. Okay, do you see it now?
Yep, now we see them. Thank you.
Okay, so here is the outline of my talk. I will give introduction and so on, talk a little bit about diffusion geometry, talk some recent work on function approximation on data-defined manifold, which I think is the most recent contribution. And then I will specifically focus on classification problems. And I will talk about two essential tools which we have developed together with Alex Cloninger in this subject. So the introduction is like this. This is the fundamental problem of machine learning. I think I will enter full screen at this point. So I'm sorry, I made a typo in this picture. But so we have given this data and we are supposed to construct a approximation gx to some unknown function f, where the gj's are noisy samples of f. And I will use the letter x for the input at which we want the value of the function. So, for example, the classification itself can be thought of as function approximation problem. In this case, the z variable is just a class label, and the function itself is defined in two steps like this. We look at the characteristic function of the class I and look at the value of I at which this characteristic function becomes maximum. So no matter how clever anybody is, if he wants to solve classification problem, then this is the function which they are implicitly approximating anyway. I will talk further about this. There is a lacuna in that, and we will try to correct it in the part of my talk having to do with classification. So anyway, this is the current methodology for machine learning, as I understand from several books and also from conversations with people like Tommy Poggio. So we have a certain universe of discourse in classical machine learning theory. This is some kind of a reproducing kernel Hilbert space. Then V sub n is a hypothesis space, which is the space of certain translates of this kernel. P star is the best approximation from here. P tilde is the minimizer of what is called the generalization error. And P sharp is the minimizer of ERM. So the idea is that we choose this V sub n depending upon the estimate on degree of approximation. Then we have to minimize the empirical risk with respect to this V sub n, which is this. And then we want to estimate the difference between these two using, for example, Vapnik VC theory. Not these two objects themselves, but the errors. These three objects, though, have nothing to do with each other. So there are a lot of things which I was extremely surprised about. So the problem is one of function approximation, and but the part of approximation theory is limited to this degree of approximation. The actual work is done in this minimization problem. And a lot more literature on machine learning is devoted to figuring out how to do this optimization in the best way, what kind of loss functions to choose, what kind of metrics to choose, what kind of regularization, and so on. Okay. But these are some things which bothered me from the beginning, and then I collected some things which continued to bother me. So the first thing is that the larger model complexity is necessary if you want to get a good approximation error. But if you then use this large model, then you have lots more parameters to train, and so it is much harder. So large amount of data and good complex model complexity are not are in conflict with each other, which looks strange to me. Then the other thing is normally this error is defined globally, like an L2 norm with respect to say measure, and that hides the local effect. So if there is just one bad point in the data, then everywhere else the error will be large. Then it has come to the attention recently that this sort of paradigm is very sensitive to the initial choice of the weights in the optimization. So Karniadakis has a paper where he shows that if you don't start with the weights properly, the deep network becomes dead on arrival. And then I discovered recently that purely looking at the degree of approximation without looking at how it is obtained can be extremely misleading. I obtained two estimates for the same class of functions using ReLU approximation. If I just look at n-term approximation, then I get dimension independent bounds. And if I want to train this using values of the function as it should be, then the bound is not dimension independent, and both of them are unimprovable bounds. So it can be very misleading. And in any case, I'm not trained in optimization theory. So of course, I started to wonder, is this all really necessary to go through such a elaborate, complicated procedure? So I don't know. Oh, something went wrong. Okay. So my goal here is to do the thing in such a way that I have a space in which f lives, most probably the space of continuous functions on some space. The V sub n will be some sort of a kernel-based approximation generally. And I want to construct this approximation directly from the data. And then I want to estimate this reconstruction error. And then I hope that this reconstruction error will be less than the constant times the absolute best you can do from this V sub n. Okay, there are some things which I don't intend to do. Oops. One is that I don't want to look at the better degree of approximation. I will be looking mostly at smooth classes of smooth functions for which the best degree of approximation is already known. There is nothing I can do to improve upon those. Then I'm not looking for a better method than everything else. That will be a pretty pompous claim on my part. And besides that, it's really not my intention. My intention is more to develop such a method itself, some paradigm shift in some way. And besides, when we are training a network on some specific data set, then it is like training a special function. When we prove a theorem, then we are proving it about function classes. So there is going to be essentially, for every problem, there will be some method which will do better than mine, and some problems for which I hope my method will do better. And one thing which has bothered me is that I'm completely unable to do this feature selection automatically. I'm told that deep networks do this, but it's not clear why and how and when they will do this. And in any case, it's simply unbelievable that a mathematician with no knowledge of the domain knowledge can ever do this feature selection correctly. But anyway, so that I'm not going, I will assume that the right feature sets are selected. Okay, since this is Fourier talks, then I'm tempted to give a very simple example involving Fourier series. So here is a little notation. I will use Q for the dimension of the input space always, because I need to use D and N for other purposes. T to the Q in this part of the talk will be a Q-dimensional torus, and this is the Lebesgue measure normalized to be probability measure. As I said, my space will always be the space of continuous functions. There is no reason to go into reproducing kernel Hilbert space or so, because I'm not measuring my error in the L2 norm to begin with. And then then I need some kind of a smoothness parameter for my functions. In this case, it means the class of all functions which have R total derivatives, and each of the derivative of order R satisfies some smoothness condition of some order alpha. It's difficult to give the details in this talk, but they are very classical. They are given in the book of Timan. I don't know why this doesn't work. I'm sorry. Okay, and this is going to be my workhorse everywhere. So I will have a smooth low pass filter, which is 1 near the origin and 0 outside of 1. And then I will construct my kernel in this way. In the trigonometric case, it is just a very simple sort of kernel like this. And the function h looks like this. Here is the graph of the absolute value of phi 32. And if you stare at it long enough, then it is hypnotizing. And so this is the kind of kernel which I will always use because I was hypnotized by these kernels. Okay, so this is a very simple approximation theorem. The moment I learned about concentration inequalities, then I just looked up Timman's book, and then it was very simple to prove this theorem. So you found this sigma operator. The z sub j's, remember, are the noisy values of the function. The noise could be additive, multiplicative, any kind of noise. The y sub j's are arbitrary points now, distributed according to this Lebesgue measure in this case. Hello? Hello? Oh, okay. Is there some question? I can't hear you.
No, I think there was no question. Just somebody unmuted for a second.
Okay, okay. So just notice that this object is constructed very directly from the data. You don't need any assumption at all about f in order to construct this object. So it is really a universal approximator. But automatically, with when f belongs to the smoothness class, then you can estimate the error directly in terms of the number of samples in this optimal way. Okay. This is going to be repeatingly the same sort of rate of approximation. It is known to be optimal in such context. So I'm not going to be able to improve upon the rate. That's not the objective. The objective is more to make such constructions in different situations and then assert that this sort of theorem holds in those cases. So here is an example of how the smoothness of the filter works. This was given to me as a challenge by Professor Karniadakis in Brown University, or maybe I developed it there. So one of the things in training deep networks is called spectral bias. So the deep network trains very quickly on the low frequency components. It takes forever to learn the high frequency components. And one of the postdocs in Brown University trained a deep network on this data, and he found out in about 1800 seconds that it does this error graph. So most of the time the errors are hovering around at the most 10 to the minus 5. But using this operator which I just defined, and FFT in this case because I just took equidistant samples, it's very easy that the error is bad at the singularities, but away from that it goes very rapidly down. And in fact, at nearly 70% of the points, the error which we obtained using this operator was less than 10 to the minus 5. And all this was done in 0.03 seconds. Okay, so then the question is, this was very easy. Why can't we do this in a more general setting? What prevents us from making this simple kind of construction? Okay, there are a lot of different obstacles. Some of them are that the data is not distributed densely on a known domain. One of the big problems in machine learning is not having enough data sometimes. But then also the domain on which the data lives is not known. For example, most of the approximation theorems are proved on a cube or sphere or some other known manifold like this, but we don't really know what that manifold is. And then we cannot choose the points y sub j. So if we are approximating on the sphere, for example, we cannot say that sample the points at the Driscoll-Healy points or choose some appropriate quadrature nodes on the cube, like we do in numerical analysis. And then everywhere there is noise. So that's why we cannot, this simple trigonometric construction is not so straightforward to generalize in, oops, now what? It's not so easy to generalize this in general context. So, okay, then came Mauro to me in 2005 or so, and he taught me about the technique called diffusion geometry. So the idea is that we assume that this data is sampled from some compact, connected, orientable, and all that nice manifold, but the manifold is unknown. And we assume that this data is sampled with respect to the volume measure or something absolutely continuous with respect to this volume measure. And then, as usual, the manifold is a low dimensional submanifold of a high dimensional space. And we want to understand the geometry of this manifold, and we want to do, of course, function approximation on the manifold. So, okay. So we start with a Laplace, the fundamental theorem in this theory is the Belkin-Yogi theorem. So we start with the Laplace-Beltrami operator on X. Then the theorem says that if you look at this heat kernel on the Euclidean space in the ambient space, then it gives an approximation to F in this sense. And the approximation error is little of t. So when I look at this, and because I'm old man, it reminds me of a theorem called Voronovskaya theorem in Bernstein approximation. So because this is a positive operator, there is what is known as a saturation phenomena. In this case, for example, if the approximation in accuracy is little of t, then this object will be 0. So it will be in some sense a trivial function. Okay, if I look at, let's go further. So the procedure then is like this. We construct a discretization of that integral. It's called the graph Laplacian. Then we find the eigendecomposition, which approximates the Laplacian eigendecomposition because of the works of many people. And then we construct an approximation using an eigendecomposition directly on this data indirectly via the kernel. So I will just advertise my own work because this is my chance to advertise my work. So the setup is, again, there is a IID sample from some distribution on a nice manifold, but the manifold is unknown. But we are nevertheless going to assume an orthogonal decomposition of some sort of a elliptic differential operator there. Okay. And then this is the space of approximants. I'm again going to work on the supremum norm on space of continuous functions. And this is the normal way nowadays of defining smoothness in approximation theory. We are interested in figuring out how the distance of the function from the space decays. And the decay condition here will be n to the gamma. So the degree of approximation results in this context are very well known. We cannot improve upon them. The question is how to manage this using the data. So one of the first things we did together with Frank Felbir and some other people also, again, this is our workhorse. Instead of e to the I k dot x, it's a inner product between the outer product of phi sub kx and phi sub ky. So now it is a two variable kernel. It's not a translation anymore because we are working on the manifold. And we proved this interesting fact that if the y sub j's are sufficiently dense, doesn't matter where they are located, and if you get enough samples, then with high probability they will be sufficiently dense in the context of this theorem. Then there exists some quadrature weights, so that for every p in this class of what we have called diffusion polynomials, these weights integrate the diffusion polynomial exactly. And moreover, this sort of stability condition holds. This is equivalent to a certain condition number of a matrix. So all we have to do is to solve this system of equations by putting certain number of basis functions for p. Then you get an underdetermined system of equations, and then you use many techniques which are available in MATLAB. Okay, so the algorithm again is going to be the same. Instead of using the phi sub n of x minus yj, this time I use my double two variate kernel. But I insert the quadrature weights here. If the noise is additive, then it gives rise to such a nice decomposition. And the result is still the same. With the right number of samples and if you choose the n in the right way, then you get the expected result, which was exactly the same what we got in the trigonometric case. Okay, so then I thought I'm done, because now I have a complete algorithm again in a general case of the diffusion geometry setting that we could do the correct approximation order. And if there is no noise, for example, if you are solving some pseudo differential operator, then it doesn't even have to be m over log n and so on. It can be just the optimal m over 1 over q. So I thought I'm all done. And I kind of proudly described this to Lorenzo Rosesco. And then he pointed out quite a few pitfalls why this is not enough. And some of the things are that, okay, first, this part was known to us already, that how do I construct this graph Laplacian? Because I want a prediction on the test data, I have to include this test data also in the construction of the graph Laplacian. So if some new data item comes up, then I have to start all over again. The other thing is we don't really know this entire system of eigenfunctions and eigenvalues. So there is some error in approximation of these things via the graph Laplacian. And then the construction of this graph Laplacian is very sensitive to the choices of some parameters in the construction of this graph Laplacian. And then there are, of course, so many errors involved in this. We don't know these eigenfunctions. We don't know these. There is some this sensitivity, so we are never sure whether we are found the right eigenfunctions and eigenvalues to work with. And everything could destroy the approximation error. So then the question was, can we approximate this f directly, avoiding all these further complications with the eigen decomposition, saturation, and whatnot? Okay, so remember that in the Belkin-Yogi theorem, there was an exponential term. When I look at that exponential term, then immediately from my childhood, I remember Hermite polynomials, and they will come to the rescue. So here is a one-shot method which I discovered recently. So we define Hermite functions in this complicated way. I will be surprised if anybody remembers this. I have used Hermite polynomials since my childhood, but I still don't remember this. But there is this great book of Zegio, which is useful to have such formulas. And this is kind of opaque, but I construct this univariate polynomial using Hermite functions. And to some of you who are old enough, this will remind of what is called the Nørlund sum in the book of Hardy. So remember, we are dealing with a multivariate setting, but this is only a univariate polynomial. And recently, Alex has found a fast algorithm to compute this also. So once more, our tool is the H function, which looks like this, but this time instead of lambda sub k, the corresponding quantity for Hermite polynomials happens to be square root of the degree. And then I construct this kernel in this way. So the setup is that we have a smooth compact Riemannian manifold. We don't know what that manifold is, but we have to know the dimension. And mu star is the volume measure. Then I have these random samples, and I'm going to look at this function in this way because I don't know where the noise is. I'm sorry, this should have been an omega actually. Then the joint distribution is tau. The marginal distribution of the y's has this form which is absolutely continuous with respect to mu star. And then my function value, which is the target value, is just the expected value of this with respect to y. I should have written a different letter here, but I have to make sure that there is a y which lives on the manifold. So I can take the numerical analysis point of view here and say that this noisy value of f is the actual value of f at some point near the manifold. But no matter where this point is, I have to know the corresponding point on the manifold. If I know this, then here is the very simple construction. No optimization, nothing like that, no quadrature formulas either. We just take this matrix vector multiplication, that's all. And then again, we need to define a smoothness class. I have to then go through some theory of weighted polynomial approximation and pointwise tangent spaces and so on. But I would like them to advertise my paper so you can just look at it instead of my going into details here and boring everybody. But the example is that if you have a gamma times continuously differentiable function, then it is surely in this class. If it is a Lipschitz continuous function, then it will be in W sub 1. So it doesn't have to be differentiable. It can be Lipschitz also. And the theorem is as we expect exactly. We have to choose this alpha carefully in this way. In most applications, I would imagine that alpha equal to 1 should be enough. And if you put alpha equal to 1 here, then this value of m is exactly the same as always we have seen. And the degree of approximation this time is not to f itself, but f times this density of the probability measure. And then we have this estimate with n to the alpha gamma in the denominator. Again, if alpha equal to 1, then this is gamma. But the only thing is, if alpha equal to 1, then this gamma will have to be less than 2. Okay, so from my point of view, this alpha is a decoration to remove this condition on gamma. Okay, so there are two things which I have proved in one stroke here. One is the density estimation. If you use this value with f equal to 1, then you are only approximating the density. Normally, when people think of probability density estimation, then they require that this kernel has to be positive. But as I mentioned, positive kernels give rise to a saturation phenomena from an approximation theory point of view. So here we don't have this. The gamma can be as large as it wants to. And of course, if you insist on a probability measure, then you just have to put an absolute value around this approximation and divide it by the sum. Okay, if you put f0 equal to 1, so your data is sampled according to the volume measure, then I have a function approximation result. And then again, it's all the best possible in terms of the sample complexity. Okay, so then the question is, does it work? So again, my interest is not so much in figuring out a better method which will work in every single thing. I'm not a magician. This is not a magic wand. And of course, in real life data, it is impossible to say whether it satisfies the conditions of a theorem or not. So, okay, besides, people have to believe in me that these very ancient techniques like Hermite polynomials and Norlin summability will actually work. But there are some young people I was lucky to find they were willing to believe and try out and give me a reality check. So one of the applications is together with Sergey Pereversiev, who is here, and Marieke van der Walt from Santa Barbara. I don't know whether she is here. So we are interested in a problem called blood sugar prediction. There is such a machine which is called continuous glucose monitoring device. And they put it under the patient skin and it measures the blood glucose level at every 5-minute intervals, for example. Okay. Then we are asked to estimate the future blood glucose levels based on the past few readings, like past half of a reading. And we are asked to estimate in which direction it is going. Is it going up or down? In this problem, the numerical errors are not that important. This is not a numerical analysis problem, and it really doesn't matter if my blood sugar is 126 or 127. There is a lot of noise here. Okay, so, but they have different effects depending upon what is the current sugar level and what is the direction and amount of change. So all the errors are not just errors, and numerical errors are not important. So some doctors came together and put a grid called PRED-EGA grade. So there are 3 kinds of blood sugar levels. One is called hypoglycemic, which means low blood sugar, glycemic, which means normal blood sugar range, and hyperglycemic means higher than normal blood sugar range. And then depending upon which range we are, different errors can have different effects. Some of them are actually considered accurate. Some of them, they are considered wrong, but they are benign, so that the patient will not die because of them. And then there are some erroneous results. So the goal is to minimize this erroneous results if we can. And then an endocrinologist told me that if you can make an accurate prediction 30 minutes ahead, then you can save lives and save a lot of money in ambulance costs also, because the patient can then be warned via some smartphone, or he or she can drive to the hospital instead of sending an ambulance there. So using our formula, then Marike did some experiments, and we found out that in many cases our method is winning even over deep networks. Sometimes it comes pretty close to that. There are two other techniques which we were asked to compare with. There is another paper with myself and Naumova, myself and Sergey Perziv and Naumova, where we used Legendre polynomials to do a linear prediction. And then there is another technique by Naumova, Pereverziev, and Sivananthan called FAL, and they have patented that technique, so it is a very strong technique. But in the hypoglycemic sense case, our technique surpassed all of them. In this idea, the FAL works a bit better, but our method is still comparable with the deep networks, as well as the FAL for that matter. And then the error in this case is best for FAL, but our technique is still better than the other two techniques, the deep network anyway. So by the way, this was based on a real life data collected in the DirectNet Central Laboratory dataset G. Okay, so as I said, it's not my goal to find the best method which will serve with every single application, but I just want to make sure that my method is not completely useless. So I hope this table shows that it is comparable. Then there is another experiment which Professor Batenko from Tel Aviv University did for me. He was interested in this NASA data where they are doing something about the aerosols above the clouds. This is not my work, and I don't have to understand what it is about. But the interesting point from my point of view is that he used only 83,000 simulated observations, whereas deep networks took more than 800,000. And then they are interested in approximating these 6 functions, whatever it means. The criteria for measuring how good we did is to use what is called the R square. So if R square is negative, then it means that the mean squared error is greater than the variance. So we need not have bothered with taking the means, our sophisticated method to begin with. We could just take the average and it will do just as good. If it is 1, then it means that we have achieved a perfect result. So close to 1 is good, negative will be bad. And now look, in our method, we are doing better than the ResNet deep network in at least 3 of the 4 functions, say 3 of the 6 functions. And he tried different parameters and different levels of training data, and qualitatively the conclusion is the same, that our method is doing better, substantially better than in some cases, and it's comparable in some other cases. Sometimes it does not do so well, for example here. Yeah, but it is also important to point out that when Dima did this work, training data for him just means only percentage out of these 83,000 points. For the ResNet, the amount of training data was substantial, so it was 95% of these 800,000 points. And of course, the ResNet is very slow. Our method is extremely fast. And now with this new algorithm, which Alex has for the fast evaluation, I expect that it will be even faster. Okay, so much about regression problems. And then these problems can be used for classification, as I told you, but there is a little problem here. And then we are wondering, can we solve that problem? So here is one of the problems. So here is a wolf in the this case of sheep, and we are given this data and we want to figure out, let's say we have this probability distribution out of which the data is coming. I want to find a classifier here, but this is a 3-way classifier. So it should be 1 if the label is 1, -1 if the label is -1, but it should be 0 if it is not certain. I have always lived in the cities, and so I have never, I've not seen a sheep or a wolf in many, many years, and certainly not closely enough to figure out how they look. So if you ask, if somebody analyzes my brain to see what kind of features it is seeing to do this data, then it's a very important question to ask whether this feature item is going to be reliable or not with respect to my classifier. And so that purpose is served by Gx being 0 or close to 0. Okay, so again, our workhorse is the same thing, but this time because we are dealing with Euclidean data, then we have to take these multivariate Hermite polynomials. When I suggested this to people, then everybody ridiculed me except for Alex. And they said that this, if you go in high dimensions and you go to high degrees, then it will be ridiculous. You can't even store this in a computer. But the thing is, there is a formula called Mailer identity. And because of this, you can write this actually as a bivariate polynomial. It doesn't matter how many dimensions are there. So then it is a fast calculation. As I mentioned, Alex was able to do this also for high degrees then. So our witness function in this case will be like this. This is the class label function for first class. This is for the second. And so I just take the difference. The phi is a highly localized kernel. So, oh, I'm sorry, this should be a yj also. So if it is a highly localized kernel, so if x is very close to yj, then only one of these will survive. The rest of them will be very small. And so only one of these will be dominant. And this means if it belongs to F2, then this will be 0, this will be -1, and we are close to -1. And likewise in the other direction. Okay, but this is for two classes. We could have multiple classes. And at each point, there is a noise associated with the reading. So in the theorem, this object will be replaced by our familiar f of ij epsilon j. So again, the setup is like this. We have this measure from which our data is chosen. It is an absolutely continuous with respect to the Lebesgue measure. And then this is our function which we are observing. The W gamma is a smoothness class. This time it is very well defined. And of course, I would like you to buy my book. It's out of print, I think. So if you want to download it by a pirated copy, then I would like you to give me either $10 or a lunch. Then, but we are interested not so much in the global smoothness class. So we are interested in figuring out regions of the data where the class label should be reliable or not reliable. And we want to decide this locally on different parts of the region. So we need a local smoothness class here. And the local smoothness class is defined like this. We define the ball of radius r around x like this. And this is the point of interest for us. We will say that this function belongs to this local smoothness class if f times phi belongs to this global smoothness class for every C infinity function supported on this ball. So now I'm going to assume that my capital F, which is the classifier function, times the little f, which is the density of the probability distribution, that will belong to this local smoothness class for this x0. And I will have some R for which this property holds. So the witness function is exactly the same as what we have already seen. It feels like being a village idiot that every problem has the same solution. But I think the surprising thing is that it is actually. So the theorem is again as expected. We need this R to be greater than n to the -2 and n like this, which means we have to adjust some parameters by trial and error, like meta parameters. But then the degree of approximation locally around this ball is the expected value. So it's not expected that this gamma will be the same at different x0s, but the error will adjust automatically to local smoothness. And please remember this example which I showed you about the high and low frequency spectral bias. So this is something similar to that. Okay, so Alex tried many examples on this, and one of the examples which I would like to share here is the well-known CIFAR 10 dataset. So there are color images in 10 classes. 50,000 are in training, 10,000 are in test. The big problem here was how to select the features. So Alex decided that he will select the features from the last hidden layer of this deep network VGG16. That was a 512 dimensional object. Up to the last layer, the deep network is collecting features. After that, it is going to the classification itself. The error rate was 6%. So we wanted to find out before we do the classification, which points are going to be unreliable out of this test data. And if we can remove those bad apples like this, okay, wolf in this picture. So if we want to determine beforehand that this is not the right object to look at, and if we can, then we want to remove this object. And once we remove this object, then things will go smoothly. So that's what happened. So by just removing about 700 points, we could drop the error in the classification to just 3.5% or even lower than that, from 6%. So out of 10,000, only 700 needed to be removed. And then there are some parameters, and here is the dependence on how the threshold, dependence on the threshold which comes into the picture there. And this is the classification error for the significant points. And you can see that that error actually goes down to less than 1%. Provided we stick to those points which we have decided to be significant points or reliable points. So it is possible to remove the wolf. I don't know if it can be done with wolves and ships in actual things, but with CIFAR 10 dataset, it is certainly possible. We can figure out whom to remove, and after we remove, we significantly improve the performance from 6% to less than 1%. Okay. So now, how much time do I have? How much time do I have?
Oh, 5 to 10 minutes.
Okay, so I will probably go a little fast here. So the problem is like this. This is the classification as a function approximation problem. But this function is discontinuous, and especially if the class boundaries collide, then we cannot even extend it to a smooth function, at least not constructively. So my viewpoint was that we can treat this as a signal separation or super resolution problem. So here are two measures out of which these classes comes up, and we are observing the data according to the convex combination of these two measures. If this mu1 and mu2 were Dirac deltas, then it would be the classical signal separation problem. In this case, it's a generalization for the major separation problem. The idea was that when we teach children, or when children learn to distinguish between airplanes and birds, of course, in the beginning, they are confused a little bit. But so there is a overlap between the boundaries. But nevertheless, we don't have to show them 10,000 airplanes and 10,000 birds for them to figure out which is an airplane and what is the bird. So how can we do this with machine learning? If I can estimate the support of mu1 and support of mu2 separately, then it's very easy. I just have to pick one example from here and one example from here, and then I have done a complete classification problem with the absolute minimum number of labels. So here I don't assume that the labels are known, but I want to figure out the right points to pick the labels, and then I will be done with complete accuracy. So, okay, this is just an existence theorem. So there is a theorem behind this. If we look at this sum, we have to take the square because we are interested in the support. If x is very close to yj, there is just one term which will survive here. And if that one term is large, then it means that we are close to the support. If it is small, then it means that we are away from the support. And this we can do for every component of the measure also. So this set will split into a partition. The challenge here is how to find this partition. But if we can do this, then the number of classes is one of the output of the theorems. That's exactly the number of partitions here. It's not assumed in advance. And then we can choose exactly one sample from the support and we are done. So let's try this on the hyperspectral data set called hyperspectral image Salinas A. It has 204 frequency band, and it's a hierarchical classification. So it can be viewed as 3 classes, or otherwise one of these classes is subdivided into 4 classes. And so we measured our error here with what is known as the F-score. And then at the points where we deemed to be reliable, the F-score error with just 500 samples went up to very close to 1. Even if the point, with all the data set, it went still up to about 75% accuracy. And these results were better than the state-of-the-art results obtained by Mauro and one of his colleagues. Okay, so to conclude this, the take-home message is that if we use these localized kernels, then the basic problem of function approximation can be solved directly and easily, and without doing all these elaborate topsy-turvy techniques which everybody uses. And we can get theoretical performance guarantees. And the second take-home message is that classification is probably treated more fruitfully as a dual problem of function approximation, more like a generalized signal separation problem. And then the reliability is determined by our witness function. And of course, research never concludes, as Wojtek mentioned. I don't want to drive anybody out of their job. I just want to collaborate with other people to see better reality check and better applications and better results. So thank you very much.